I was never much of a camper. I didn't grow up doing the whole outdoors thing. My parents were city people. Weekends meant going to the mall, not the mountains. But I got into it later, in my late 20s, after a friend dragged me along on a weekend hike, and I kind of got hooked on the feeling of being out in the middle of nowhere. The quiet, the simplicity of it, the way everything slows down. There's something satisfying about relying on your own gear, your own preparation. You feel capable, in control. So over the years, I started going on solo trips, just a weekend here and there. I'd drive upstate, usually New York or Vermont, park near a trailhead, hike a few miles in, and pitch a tent. Just me, a fire, some instant coffee, and maybe a paperback. I wasn't trying to be Bear Grylls. I always kept things simple. I'd never do anything too risky. I brought a GPS, backup battery, pepper spray, first aid, the whole deal. I wasn't trying to make the news. Anyway, this trip started like any other. It was early fall, that sweet spot in late September when the air starts to get cold at night, but the days are still warm enough to hike without freezing. I'd picked out a spot in the southern Adirondacks. Not a super popular trail, but not totally off-grid either. It had a few scattered primitive campsites and a small stream nearby. The plan was to hike in about 6 miles, set up camp, spend 2 nights, and come back Sunday afternoon. The first day was uneventful. I parked in a dirt lot, shouldered my pack, and hiked in. The trail was quiet. I only passed 2 people the whole time, both heading out, not in. I found a decent spot a little ways off the trail, close enough to find again if I wandered, but far enough that no one would just stumble on it. It was surrounded by tall trees, and there was a mossy boulder I could sit on near the fire ring. The stream was 100 feet downhill, just loud enough to drown out any small sounds. It was perfect. I set up my tent, got a small fire going, made some food, and settled in. That night, I sat by the fire in my jacket and watched the sky turn from gray to black. It was peaceful. No sounds except the wind and the water. I felt like I'd made a good call picking this place. The second day was when things got weird. I woke up around 6. The sun was barely up. I made coffee and oatmeal, then went for a short hike, just a loop about 2 miles long to stretch my legs. When I came back, I noticed something strange. Nothing huge, just off. A small pile of stones near my tent that I hadn't noticed before, like someone had stacked 5 or 6 river rocks. I didn't remember seeing them when I set up camp. I stared at them for a while, trying to decide if I just missed them. I told myself I probably had. I wasn't looking for rock piles, and it's easy to overlook stuff when you're unloading gear and setting up. I brushed it off, made lunch, and then decided to walk down to the stream to wash my pot. That's when I saw the second thing. Near the stream bank, maybe 20 feet from the water, there was a patch of disturbed ground. It wasn't dramatic, just a spot where the dirt looked darker and looser than the rest, like it had been dug and then filled in again. The grass and moss were messed up, the way they get when something's been moved. I crouched down and touched the soil. It was damp and soft, like it hadn't settled yet. I didn't like it. I stood there for a while, just staring at the spot. The first thing that crossed my mind was some kind of animal had buried something. A dead bird, maybe, but it looked too neat, too intentional, like someone had buried something there on purpose. It was rectangular, about the size of a backpack. The shape was weird. I didn't dig it up. I thought about it, but I didn't want to find out it was something gross. Or worse, that it was something I shouldn't see. So I just left it, went back to camp, and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling in my stomach. Later that afternoon, I wandered a bit farther down the trail to collect some dry wood. On the way back, I saw something that made my skin go cold. The pile of rocks near my tent, it had changed. There were now 8 rocks instead of 6, and one of them was wet, dark and shiny, like it had just come from the stream. I was 100% sure I hadn't touched them. I hadn't gone near them since morning. That's when I started to seriously wonder if someone else was out here. Someone who'd seen me, but I hadn't seen them. Maybe they were watching from the trees or following me without making noise. I looked around, scanning the trees, listening. Nothing, just the wind. I thought about packing up and leaving. It wouldn't have taken more than an hour to hike back to the car, maybe less if I moved quick. But I told myself I was overreacting. It was just some weird coincidence. Maybe a raccoon or some bored hiker playing a prank. I convinced myself to stay one more night. I keep a knife in my sleeping bag and the pepper spray within reach, just in case. I wish I had left. That night, I built a bigger fire than usual. I kept it going longer, tossing in wood every few minutes, staring into the flames like they could protect me. I didn't like the dark outside the ring of light. I kept thinking I saw movement at the edge of my vision, branches twitching, shadows flicking, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing. Around 11, I forced myself into the tent. I zipped everything up tight and laid there in my bag, eyes open, knife in my hand. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. When I did, it wasn't deep. I woke up maybe an hour later, heart racing. There'd been a sound, a soft, wet sound, like someone walking through mud. I held my breath and listened. I could hear something outside. Breathing? No, not breathing exactly. Just movement. Something brushing against my tent. Lightly, like a fingertip. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just waited. It stopped after a few minutes. Or maybe longer. I lost track of time. Eventually, I fell back asleep out of sheer exhaustion. The next morning, I opened the tent and nearly threw up. Right in front of the entrance, someone had left something. Pile of dirt. On top of the dirt, a small, clear plastic container. It looked like an old takeout container, the kind you get soup in. Inside it were beans. Sprouted beans. You know, those pale white roots that curl out of the sides? They were packed in there, pushing against the plastic. I stared at it for a long time. Then I saw the rocks. The pile was gone. In its place was a line. One single line of 10 stones, stretching from the fire ring to the edge of the trees. Like a pointer, like a path. I've never packed up camp so fast in my life. I threw everything into my pack, didn't even try to fold the tent, just crammed it in. I was on the trail in less than 10 minutes, moving fast, heart hammering the whole time. I kept checking over my shoulder. Every sound made me flinch. When I got to the car, I locked the doors and just sat there, trying to calm down. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just a prank, some sick backwoods joke. Maybe someone lived out there, some weirdo who liked messing with campers. But the thing that stuck with me, the thing I couldn't shake, was the beans. They weren't just sprouting. They were sprouting from something. The container wasn't filled with soil. It was filled with something dark and clumpy. It looked like ground meat. I didn't want to know what kind. I drove straight home. Didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't even pee until I was back in the city. I left my gear in the trunk for 2 days. When I finally pulled it out to clean it, I found a single rock tucked into the side pocket of my backpack. Just one. Round, wet, and cold. I threw it into the trash and didn't go camping again for almost a year. Later, I looked up reports of missing persons in that area. There were a few. A hiker 2 years ago who vanished. An older man who wandered off trail and never came back. One report mentioned a guy who was living out there off-grid. Police found his camp, but not him. His stuff was still there, but he was gone. They said it looked like he'd left in a hurry. There was one weird detail in the report. They said the fire ring at his camp was filled with dirt, packed tight like it had been used to bury something. When they dug it up, they found a sealed plastic container. Inside it were beans, sprouting. They didn't say what the beans were growing in. I don't know if what I found was related. I don't know if I was in the same area or just nearby. But every now and then, I think about the way that ground looked near the stream, the rectangular shape, the fresh dirt. I think about how carefully that container was placed in front of my tent, like a message. I think someone was trying to show me something, or maybe someone was trying to grow something. Either way, I got the message, and I never went back. I've always liked camping by myself. I guess some people don't get it. They think being alone in the woods is creepy. But for me, it's peaceful. I don't have to hear phones ringing, no cars honking, no people talking at me, just quiet. Trees, dirt, bugs, and my thoughts. It used to calm me down, helped clear my head. Now, though, I haven't gone back into the woods since what happened last fall. I never meant to find anything. I wasn't even looking. I had time off from work and decided to go camp at a spot I hadn't visited in years. It was off a logging road in rural Oregon, up past a place called Falls Ridge. Nothing fancy, just a clearing about a quarter mile from a little creek. There's no cell service, no houses for miles. I liked that about it. I drove in Friday morning. I had all my gear in the bed of the truck. Tent, shovel, cooler, lanterns, enough water to last 4 days. I parked off the dirt track and hiked in about 10 minutes to the spot I remembered. It was still there. Trees thinned out to a flat patch maybe 40 feet wide, ringed by tall pines and maple. Ground was soft but not muddy, perfect for tent stakes. I walked around to check for dead branches overhead, widowmakers we used to call them, and found none. Everything felt solid, untouched. I set up camp and ate lunch sitting on an old tree stump I found near the north edge. The rest of the day, I fished a little at the creek and then chopped up some kindling. Nothing weird, just the usual stuff. I made a small fire once it got dark, cooked a hot dog on a stick, and lay on my sleeping bag with my head poking out of the tent. The sky was clear, stars like salt on black velvet. No clouds, just silence and cold night air. It wasn't until the second day I found the hole. I was walking maybe 100 yards from my tent looking for dry wood when I noticed the smell. Sharp like old trash or rotting food. At first I thought maybe something had died nearby, so I followed the scent. Took me toward a patch where the trees were thicker. And there, right between two mossy boulders, was a hole. Not a natural one either. It was square, maybe 3 feet by 3 feet, about 5 feet deep. The edges were sharp, like they'd been dug with a shovel. The dirt was piled neatly next to it in a mound. It didn't look fresh, though. The dirt was dry and had leaves on it. Still, someone had done this by hand. I didn't climb in, but I stood on the edge and looked down. It was empty, just dirt and a few pebbles at the bottom. But that smell, it was stronger there, like meat gone bad. I figured maybe someone had buried something and a raccoon dug it back up. There were no tools nearby, no trash, no footprints I could see. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there for a while, then walked back to camp. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about the hole. It didn't sit right with me. Something about how clean the shape was. And why here, in the middle of nowhere? If someone was trying to bury trash or whatever, why go through all the trouble? And why leave the dirt in a neat pile? I got up around midnight and sat by the fire pit. I hadn't lit a fire, but I brought the lantern. I remember how still it was. No wind, not even bugs. That smell was faint on the air, like it followed me. Or maybe it clung to my clothes from earlier. I told myself I'd check it again in the morning, just to be sure nothing dangerous was there. I ended up sleeping a few hours, but the next day I hiked straight back to the hole. That's when I saw the second one. About 10 feet from the first, same size, same depth. Neat pile of dirt next to it. This one smelled worse. I backed off pretty quick. I didn't want to look inside. Something about it just felt wrong. Like maybe I'd walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. I'm not a cop. I'm not a detective. But I know when something isn't normal. I hiked back to my truck, thinking I'd maybe drive into town and call the sheriff's office. Just let them know what I saw. But halfway there, I stopped. What if they didn't believe me? What if they thought I was messing around, or worse, responsible for it? That fear sat heavy in my chest. I know how it sounds, but I went back to camp instead. I told myself I'd stay one more night, pack up early, and report it when I got home. I had photos of the holes on my phone. That would be enough. But when I woke up the next morning, there were 3 more. 5 in total now. All in a row about 10 feet apart, like a grim little garden. The dirt mounds were perfectly shaped, and the holes? Still empty, still smelling like death. Only now, one of them had something growing in it. I stood there with my arms hanging limp at my sides. I didn't move for a long time, because it wasn't just a plant. It was a sprout. A thick, bright green shoot, maybe 8 inches tall. Looked like a bean plant, but stronger. Its stem was wider than any sprout I'd seen, and the leaves were sharp-edged, almost waxy. It hadn't been there yesterday. It had grown overnight. That's when I started feeling something deeper than fear. Not panic, not shock, something colder, something that sat low in my gut and told me to walk away and not look back. But I didn't. I stayed another hour. I checked the area, walked a few hundred feet in every direction, looking for bags, tools, signs of other people. I didn't find anything, but I did find a boot. It was old, faded leather, the sole cracked, partly sunk in mud under a log. Inside was a sock. No foot, just the sock, and it was soaked with something dark. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even get in my tent. I sat against a tree with my knife in my lap and my lantern on low. I kept hearing sounds in the brush, light, soft scraping noises. Not like animals, not like twigs snapping under hooves or paws, more like something dragging slowly over the dirt. Every now and then I thought I saw movement between the trees, but when I turned my head, nothing was there. At some point in the night, I must have dozed off. When I woke up, it was early morning. My body was sore and my mouth dry. I stood slowly, stretched, and turned toward the holes. All 5 now had sprouts, tall, green, vibrant. Each one had grown at least 2 feet. Their stalks curled upward like vines reaching for the sky. It looked like a dammed crop field. I didn't go near them. I didn't need to. I packed up. I didn't fold anything, just stuffed it all in my duffel and left the firewood behind. I hiked out with fast steps and didn't stop until I was in my truck, keys in the ignition, backing down the dirt road. I didn't tell anyone what I saw, not then, but a few weeks later I went back. I had to. Something about those plants, it stuck in my head. I'd wake up thinking about them. I'd see vines in my dreams. I had to know if they were still there, if they had grown. I went in the evening, brought a flashlight and a camera this time. Same route, same trail. When I got to the clearing, I felt my throat go dry. The plants were taller than me. Each stalk had thickened into a twisted green column, with wide, flat leaves that hung like heavy flags. And from the center of each plant hung long, curled bean pods, dark green, almost black. At the base of the 5th one, the dirt looked different, sunken like it had collapsed in on itself. I didn't go close enough to touch, but I zoomed in with the camera. The base wasn't just sunken, it was stained, dark brown, almost red, like something had bled into the dirt. The others looked the same. That's when I knew. It wasn't just plants. These were growing from something dead, maybe people. I walked backward out of the clearing. I didn't turn around until I hit the trail. Then I ran. Back home, I tried to look up missing persons cases from the area. A few hikers, maybe a transient or 2. Nothing unusual, nothing that tied together. That night, I had a nightmare, not of the plants, but of a man, his face bloated, skin pale, lying curled in a square hole while roots grew from his chest. I woke up gagging. The image burned into my mind. A few days later, I reported the location to the sheriff's office anonymously. I gave GPS coordinates and said I'd seen something strange. I never followed up. But last week, something showed up on my porch. A bundle of beans, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. No note, just sitting there on my welcome mat like a gift. I didn't touch it. I burned it in a trash can in my yard, then scrubbed the concrete with bleach. And last night, in the dream again, the vines moved. Not in the wind, not slowly. They reached. A few years ago, I took a solo camping trip through a patch of land near the base of the Andes, somewhere between the edges of Colombia and Venezuela. I had a bit of vacation time stacked up, and I didn't feel like cities or hotels. I wanted real nature, isolation. I didn't go fully off-grid, but it was pretty close. No tourists, no signs, just rough trails and old dirt roads that wound through scrub and shadow. Before I left, I stayed a night in a small town on the Venezuelan side. It was the kind of place where the walls are made of cinder block and paint fades to dust. It was humid and warm, and dogs barked in the distance long after dark. I slept in a rented room over a bar, and down by the fire pit, a group of locals were drinking and telling stories. I sat with them for a bit, didn't say much, just listened and nodded. One guy brought up El Silban, the whistling ghost. They all laughed nervously when he did. It didn't feel like a story to them. felt more like a warning. The tale went like this. On cold, dark nights in remote places, especially near the plains and hills of this region, people sometimes hear a whistling sound out on the road. At first, it's loud, right near your ear, and then it fades until it sounds like it's far off. But that's the trick. The quieter the whistle, the closer he is. When it gets soft and thin like wind through dry grass, he's already at your door. Then he sits, and he counts the skulls of his victims, one by one, out loud. You have to listen. If you miss the count, someone in your family dies. They said he wears a farmer's clothes, torn, dusty, a wide straw hat. He has a dead, pale face and walks with a dragging step. And if he sees you, really sees you, you're done. He never lets go. I thought it was just a folktale, something to add weight to an empty night. I nodded and smiled. Then I left for the hills the next morning and forgot all about it. The first 2 days were perfect. I hiked high into the low ranges, following old mule trails and goat paths. I made camp along the tree line, looking out over wide dry valleys. The sky was enormous out there. I brought just what I needed. A tent, a tarp, food, water filter, knife, headlamp, and a solid walking stick I cut myself. I was a couple thousand feet up, where the nights got cold and the air smelled of sage and wood smoke. I didn't see a soul the entire time. That second night, the sky was so clear I could see every star. I made a small fire and ate rice and beans I cooked on my camp stove. There was nothing to be afraid of. No animals, no people, no sounds but the wind. I read a bit, then curled into my sleeping bag and passed out. The third night is when something changed. I'd moved camp that day, deeper into the hills. The path had thinned to nothing, and I found a rocky clearing behind some dry trees. No sign anyone had ever camped there. No fire ring, no footprints. I liked that. I set up camp quickly before dark. My tarp was tied low, blocking the wind, and my tent was snug and tight. The air dropped fast that evening. My breath turned into mist. That night, after I ate, I put out my fire early and just lay there, listening to the wind scratch through the brush. It was quiet for hours, nothing but insects. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up. I wasn't sure why at first, just had that feeling, you know, the one where your body tenses before your mind understands. Like something's near you and your nerves know it before you do. I sat up in my bag and unzipped the tent slowly. The wind had stopped, dead still. Then I heard it, a whistle, high-pitched, a few short notes. Sounded weird, not like someone casually whistling a tune, more like a signal, deliberate. One note rising, one dropping, then silence. Like we. It was loud, too loud, like someone was standing right outside my tent. I froze, kept going, spaced out, not rushing. I stayed perfectly still, no movement. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake. I didn't think of El Silban right away. I just thought, someone's out here, someone's watching. But then the sounds started to fade. Each whistle got a little quieter. It went from right outside my tent to maybe 20 feet away, then 40, then more. At first I felt relief. Whoever it was, they were leaving. But then, in the cold and silence, that story came back to me. The quieter it gets, the closer he is. I pushed the thought away. It was just a campfire story. There's no ghost, no pale face, no skulls. Just some hiker, maybe drunk, maybe lost. Still, I stayed awake the rest of the night, heart pounding with every breeze. The next morning, I found nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no signs of another person. But about 30 yards from my tent, down a slope, I found something else. A straw hat, old, frayed, half buried in leaves, just sitting there like someone placed it. I didn't touch it. I packed up camp immediately and hiked out. I changed course, headed down a steeper path toward an old logging road I'd seen on satellite maps before the trip. It would take me longer to get out, but I didn't care. I didn't want to retrace my steps. I wanted open space and a path I hadn't walked before. I hiked for hours. My legs were shaking by the time I found the road. It was barely more than 2 ruts in the dirt, but it led downhill. I followed it, That night, I didn't set up a tent. I didn't make a fire. I found a dip in the road and laid my sleeping bag out under some scrub brush, hoping it would hide me. I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The whistle. This time, it was already faint, thin and far off, like someone whistling across a field. But the moment I heard it, I broke into a cold sweat. I couldn't tell if it was up the road or behind me. Then I heard another sound. Stones moving, like someone stepping carefully on gravel. I stayed low. I didn't move. I pulled my bag over my head and listened. The whistle came again, just once, then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The first light, I bolted. I hiked faster than I ever had. The road eventually curved into a wider dirt path that led to an abandoned station. Probably an old fire lookout or ranger post. A single shack, doors gone, roof half collapsed. No one had been there in years. I stopped only long enough to drink some water and check my phone. No signal. Then I saw it. On the door frame of the shack, etched into the wood, were tally marks. For columns, each one with dozens of lines scratched deep. And under them, a single word, carved faint but clear.
Silbón.
I left immediately. Didn't stop until I saw tire tracks. Fresh ones. Eventually, I flagged down a farmer in a truck. He didn't speak much English, but he understood enough. He dropped me at a bus station, and I paid him all the cash I had left. When I got back to my hotel, I didn't sleep for 2 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that whistle. For a while, I thought maybe it was just some local playing a trick. Maybe there really was someone out there who liked messing with hikers. Maybe it was all part of the legend. A real man acting like a ghost, using fear to control people. Like a mask passed down through generations. But then something happened that pulled me back in. 2 weeks after I got home, a package showed up at my door. No return address. Inside was a bundle of old dry leaves tied with twine. And under the leaves, a hat, frayed, straw. I didn't bring anything back from that trip. I know that. I packed every item myself. Checked my gear twice. Whatever that was, someone sent it. Someone knew. I threw it out immediately. Burned the box. I moved apartments a month later. To this day, I still don't believe in ghosts. But every now and then, in the dead of night, when the air goes cold and the wind stops, I hear whistling. And when it sounds far away, that's when I check the locks. And I listen. I don't know exactly what I thought I was doing when I went back there, to the old fields. I wasn't expecting much. Maybe just a quiet weekend by myself. Something to help me clear my head. But now that I think back on it, maybe I was trying to feel closer to my dad. It had been a few years since he passed, and for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about the land he used to farm. Maybe I thought if I walked the fields again, even just once, I'd remember something I'd lost. My dad was a hardworking man, the kind who didn't say much, didn't complain, just worked the ground and let the results speak for him. His back was always sunburned, and his hands were thick with calluses. He grew sweet corn, beans, and squash mostly. Sold to local stores, even had deals with some of the IGA chain groceries in the region. It wasn't a huge operation, just under 60 acres, but he worked it like it was a full-time job and then some. I helped when I was a kid, mostly summers, and when I got older I drifted away, found an office job, moved to the city. He never asked me to stay. He didn't beg. But I know now he probably hoped I'd come back one day and keep the farm alive. But I didn't. And when he passed, the land sat quiet. Eventually, it was sold off. A development company bought up half of it, and the other half went to some guy who never did anything with it. It just sat there overgrown. The farmhouse is gone now, bulldozed to make way for a wide gravel road that goes nowhere. But the woods along the edge of the property, the ones that bordered the old corn rows, that part wasn't touched. And that's where I decided to camp. I brought a tent, a cooler, some water, and a sleeping bag. It was early September, and the days were still warm enough, but the nights were starting to cool down. Perfect camping weather. I parked on the gravel road, walked the edge of the trees until I found a good flat patch not far from where the barn used to be. I could still see the fence posts sticking out of the weeds like old bones. I set up my tent and walked the property line for a while. I didn't see anyone. I didn't expect to. What I didn't expect to see were the rows. They were faint, but they were there. Long mounds of earth just barely raised, covered in weeds now, but still in the same layout I remembered. Row after row, parallel and clean. And in between them, the faintest hint of what used to grow there. Wild bean vines, old, twisted corn stalks with no ears, and squash vines curling up through the brambles. It was strange. No one had farmed this land in over a decade, but nature had kept the pattern. Like the soil remembered. I walked those rows for almost 2 hours. My boots crunched over broken stems and dry earth. I saw rabbit droppings, deer tracks, even a pile of half-chewed corn husks. Wild animals had taken over, sure, but the plants were still growing in the same pattern. Squash near the base, beans climbing the dry grass, and corn in the gaps. The three sisters, my dad called them. He liked the idea of how they worked together. Squash kept the weeds down, beans added nitrogen to the soil, and corn gave the beans something to climb. But he always did it his own way. He planted them in separate ridged rows. Beans got their own section with poles for them to climb, not tangled in the corn. The squash he let spread where it wanted. He used the traditional technique but adapted it, tweaked it. It worked for him. He sold more vegetables than anyone else at the local markets for years. I stood there that first evening with my boots in the dirt, watching the sun go down, thinking about those days. My dad wiping sweat from his face with a bandana, tossing fresh corn into wooden crates, my hands covered in soil as I tried to keep up. He never said much, but he taught me more than I realized at the time. I made a small fire that night in a pit I dug myself and cooked a can of beans and some hot dogs. Simple food. The stars were clear, and the moon was half full. I didn't hear anything strange, just crickets and a breeze in the tall grass. The first sign something was off came the next morning. I woke up with a headache. It wasn't that cold, but I was shivering. My sleeping bag was damp, like there was dew inside of it, not just on the outside. When I stepped out of the tent, the ground was wet, not just damp from morning dew, but muddy, even though it hadn't rained. My boots sunk half an inch into it, and the air smelled different, almost sweet, like rotting fruit. I walked the rows again, trying to figure out why the ground was so wet. It didn't make sense. There hadn't been any storms in weeks. I followed one of the bean rows down to the far edge of the property, where an old irrigation ditch used to run. That ditch was full, brimming in fact, but it wasn't clear water. It was thick, like runoff from a flooded garden. Brown, filled with leaves and bits of old corn husks. It looked like someone had poured water over the whole area in the night. I bent down and dipped my fingers in. It was warm, not hot, but warmer than it should have been. And that's when I noticed the squash. It wasn't there yesterday, not like this. Full, ripe squash, big ones, like the kind we used to harvest back in the day. Bright orange skin, thick vines curling in every direction. I counted at least 15, maybe 20 of them, growing right out of the earth in places where yesterday there had only been weeds. That didn't make sense. They couldn't have grown overnight, but there they were, fully formed. Some of them split at the sides like they'd grown too fast and cracked under their own weight. I walked back to camp in a kind of daze. My fire pit was flooded. The wood was soaked, useless. I sat on a folding chair and tried to wrap my head around what was going on. I kept thinking maybe the land had some underground spring I didn't know about. Maybe the recent heat had caused a buildup of pressure or something. But even that didn't explain the squash. By the third day, the beans had climbed my tent. I hadn't noticed them at first. They were thin, almost delicate, but they'd wrapped around the poles and the rainfly. When I tried to peel them off, they stuck like glue. The tips of the vines had coiled in tight spirals, clinging to anything they touched. When I pulled too hard, the vines snapped, and a sharp odor hit me, like ammonia and mold. That day, I walked the rows again, and that was when I saw the fresh mounds of dirt. 4 of them, long, narrow, maybe 6 feet each, raised like shallow graves. They hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. They were too clean, too uniform. The dirt was loose, freshly turned, and all around them grew thick rows of corn. taller than anything else on the property. Way taller than the stuff that had been growing wild. The stalks looked alive in a way that was wrong. They swayed, but not in rhythm with the wind. They leaned slightly inward toward the mounds. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the car with the doors locked, even though I knew that wouldn't really do much if something wanted in. I kept the windows cracked, listened. There were sounds in the dark. The creaking of plants under strain, the faint slap of water on soil, and what I swear was the faint sound of vines brushing over nylon, like fingers trailing across my tent. I didn't get out. I didn't even breathe heavy. In the morning, the tent was collapsed. The poles were bent inward, snapped in the middle. The canvas was torn, and inside, where my sleeping bag had been, the ground was churned up, soft and black, like compost. My food was untouched, but my boots, which I'd left outside the tent flap, were gone. I found one about 20 feet away, sitting upright at the edge of a squash plant, its laces tied in a neat bow. I didn't try to pack. I left everything. I got in the car and drove, right through the tall grass and out to the gravel road. The vines scratched the undercarriage, and I could hear them snapping under the tires. The whole field was different now. As I looked out the window while I drove away, I saw that the old bean poles my dad used to set up were back, standing in neat rows, each one with vines coiled around them, thick and green and trembling in the wind. I didn't tell anyone about it. What could I say? That the land remembered how to grow on its own? That it didn't need people anymore? I checked satellite images later, just for curiosity. And you know what? You can see the rows. Faint, but they're there. Straight lines carved into the earth. No one farms that land. No one lives there. But something keeps growing. A month later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a squash. Big, ripe, perfect. No rot, no spots. Just a single squash and a folded piece of paper. No writing. Just 3 parallel lines drawn in thick black marker. I buried it in my backyard. And I don't go camping anymore. I never liked camping much, but I always told myself I should try it more. I guess there was something about getting away from everything. No phones, no traffic, no people. Just trees, bugs, and your own head. That can be a good or a bad thing depending on who you are. In my case, it was kind of both. This happened 2 summers ago. I'd just come off a rough year. Lost my job, broke up with someone I thought I was going to marry, and had to move back into my mom's basement for a few months while I figured things out. I felt like I was suffocating. So when my cousin told me about this small campground up in the woods about 4 hours north, I said screw it. I packed up my car with a cooler, a tent, some old gear from the garage, and headed out. The campground wasn't official. No signs, no rangers, just a small dirt road off a 2-lane highway that took you deep into the woods until it stopped at a little clearing. A fire ring, a couple of logs around it for sitting, and a barely visible trail heading further into the forest. No one else was there when I arrived, which felt a little eerie, but also perfect. I set up my tent near the tree line and got a fire going before sunset. It was the first time in months I felt calm. The night air was cool and clean, and the stars were brighter than I'd seen in years. I sat there in the quiet and just breathed. The next morning, I decided to explore that barely there trail. I figured it might lead to a stream or some old hunting ground. It was narrow and overgrown in places, clearly not used much. I walked for maybe a mile when I came across something strange. It looked like a fence, but it wasn't made of wire or wood, just posts, like rough stakes, maybe 6 feet tall, spaced evenly in a big rectangle. No wire connecting them, no gate. They looked old, the wood gray and split, some leaning a bit but still standing. In the middle of the space they enclosed, the ground was bare. No grass, no weeds, just hard-packed dirt. Around the edge, there were small piles of rocks, almost like markers. I stood there a while, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was some kind of old animal pen or maybe even a garden that someone had fenced in. But there were no signs of farming, no leftover rows, no tools, no signs of use. Still, something about it made my skin crawl. I don't know why. It was just so quiet there. No birds, no wind, no movement. I told myself I was overthinking it, just jumpy from being alone. So I walked back to camp and didn't think much more about it for the rest of the day. That night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place. I sleep pretty light, especially outdoors, but this wasn't a normal forest sound. It was rhythmic, like a low thumping, not heavy, more like a dull knock on wood. Came from the direction of the trail. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. It went on for a minute, then stopped. Then it came again, a little slower. Then nothing. I didn't go out to check. I just told myself it was probably a deer rubbing against a tree or some animal digging. But I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I made coffee and sat by the fire trying to shake the weird feeling from the night before. I kept thinking about that fenced-in area. I decided to go back, maybe take some pictures. I wanted to show my cousin, maybe ask around about it later. When I got there, I stopped dead in my tracks. The posts had been moved. Not all of them, just 2 or 3. They'd been pulled up and pushed into the ground again, maybe 5 or 6 feet closer to the center. I walked around the edge, checking. It wasn't just my memory playing tricks. There were drag marks in the dirt, small holes where the posts used to be. The piles of rocks had been shifted too, like someone had kicked through them or added to them. Again, I thought maybe it was an animal or even another camper messing around, but I hadn't seen or heard anyone else since I got here. And who would go out of their way to move fence posts for no reason? I didn't like it. I snapped a couple of pictures with my phone, even though I had no signal out there. Then I headed back, a little faster than I had come. That night, it got worse. I heard the thumping again, but it was closer, much closer. Not just one knock now, but a series. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 2. Then 3 again. I laid still in my tent, staring at the ceiling like I could see through it. The sound came from the tree line this time, maybe 30 feet away. Then silence. I don't know how long I laid there, frozen. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to daylight. I almost packed up right then and there, but something in me said I needed to know what was going on. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe both. I grabbed a hatchet from my car, just in case, and went back to the fence. It had changed again. More posts had been moved. The rectangle was smaller now. The piles of rocks were larger, stacked higher. And this time, there was something in the middle. I couldn't believe it at first. I had to walk around it twice to be sure. Someone had dug a hole. Perfect square, maybe 3 feet across, about 2 feet deep. The dirt was piled next to it like a small grave. My heart started beating so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't go any closer. I didn't take pictures. I turned around and walked straight back to camp. I started packing, throwing stuff into my car without folding or organizing anything. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just some weird rural art project or some eccentric's idea of a joke. But the more I thought about it, the less that made sense. Who would come all the way out here day after day just to move old posts and dig holes? And why was the shape getting smaller? I was almost done packing when I realized something else. The sound, the thumping, the movement of the posts, the piles of rocks. It was all consistent, measured, deliberate, like steps, like someone or something was closing in bit by bit. I got in my car and drove. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, didn't even look back until I was 2 hours south. I found a gas station with a signal and checked my phone. The pictures I'd taken were gone. Not deleted, not corrupted, just never saved, it seemed. I remember snapping them, watching the screen, but they weren't there. I didn't go back. Not that week, not ever. I looked up the area when I got home. Found nothing about that campground, nothing about that part of the woods. Not even a name. It was like that little piece of land didn't exist on any map I could find. My cousin swore he'd camped there a few years back, but when I described the fence, he just said, "Yeah, this isn't a horror story, bro. It's a farming technique." I asked him what he meant. He laughed and said some locals use weird methods for soil rotation and pest control, stuff passed down from old families who'd been living out there for generations. Just old country logic, he called it. But that wasn't logic. That was methodical, slow pressure. That was narrowing space. That was being boxed in, step by step, like something was practicing a trap, and I was dumb enough to watch it happen. I tried to forget. I went on with life. Got a new job, moved into a new place, started over. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that sound in my head. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. 3 again. Sometimes I wonder if I hadn't left that morning, if I'd waited one more day, what I would have found when I went back. What would have been waiting in the center of that rectangle. What that last hole would have been for. But I don't let myself think about it for long. And I don't camp alone anymore. They say you can tell a lot about a person by the way they camp. Some people set up like they're trying to survive the apocalypse. Tarped canopies, bear-proof containers, gas stoves, and LED lanterns on poles. Others treat it like a drunken vacation, playing loud music with coolers full of beer and a fire pit stacked higher than regulation allows. Me, I camp to get away, to go quiet. No cell service, no news, no noise, just space to think. It's something I started doing more regularly after my brother died. He was a farmer like our father before him, and I guess like me, though I never had the same heart for it. After he passed, I took some of the inheritance and bought an old pickup and some gear and just started disappearing into the woods now and then. Not far, mostly upstate, sometimes further west, but always far enough that I could go a day or two without seeing another person. There was a particular spot I kept coming back to, near the edge of some old forest where fields used to be, back when small farms were more common. No signs now, just trees trying to reclaim what was once tilled and worked. But if you paid attention, you could still see the straight lines where the plow had gone, the odd square of cleared space, and now and then a few rusted pieces of broken machinery, long surrendered to the soil. I had been going there off and on for 2 years when I found the patch. It was late September, cool air, but dry. Not many bugs, and the forest was starting to burn orange around the edges. I set up camp the usual way. Tent just past the tree line, facing the clearing, fire ring laid with dry wood, pack hung up to keep away raccoons. I'd been hiking that day, not far, just meandering through deer trails, and I came out the other side of a bramble choke when I saw something strange. A small plot, maybe 20 by 20 feet. It looked like a garden, but not modern. The layout was old-fashioned, a technique I vaguely remembered reading about, something the native tribes used and some early farmers adopted. The 3 sisters planting style: corn, beans, and squash. Corn grew tall and straight, the beans climbed the stalks, and the squash spread low, keeping weeds down and moisture in. It was smart farming, cooperative, but this garden was out of place. Perfect rows, no weeds. The corn was tall, too tall for the season. Beans twined up and around the stalks like they were clinging for life. The squash leaves were wide, full, rich green. It all looked too healthy, too alive. I stood there a long time, not because it was spooky exactly, but because it felt wrong. No one lived out there. The nearest house was miles away, and the terrain between here and there wasn't friendly. No roads, no paths, just thick brush and steep climbs. I crouched at the edge and touched the soil. It was damp but not muddy, fresh, like someone had watered it not long before. That night, I didn't sleep well. No sounds, not even the usual ones. No owls, no distant coyotes. Just silence, thick and heavy. A few times I thought I heard movement, but nothing sharp. Just soft brushing sounds, like something pushing through the grass. In the morning, I went back to the garden. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted proof I hadn't imagined it. But when I got there, something had changed. The corn was taller. That didn't make sense. Not overnight. It had grown at least 6 inches. The beans, too, now coiled higher, reaching past the tassels like they were searching for the sky. I stepped in this time, moved between the rows. The soil was still damp, still fresh. As I walked, I started to feel something under the soles of my boots. Uneven spots, not rocks, not roots. Something softer. I knelt again and brushed back the dirt between 2 mounds. There was fabric. I stopped. It was dark blue, denim maybe, or something like it. Worn, torn, and half buried. I dug a little more, not much, and saw more cloth. A button. Then, under that, the hint of a belt loop. I stepped back and out of the garden. I stood at the edge for a long time, my heart beating too hard for how still everything was. I didn't want to know more. I didn't want to dig deeper. I told myself I could leave, pack up and be gone before nightfall. But I didn't move. Something kept me rooted. Some dumb, dull curiosity, or maybe the need to know exactly what I'd stumbled into. I spent the rest of the day exploring further around the area. Found another clearing maybe 50 yards away. Smaller, same layout, same perfect plants. Another Three Sisters plot. I checked 3 others by the end of the day. Each time, the corn grew too high, the beans were too thick, and the squash leaves wide enough to hide a small child under. I slept with my knife that night, not because I thought someone was coming, but because I started thinking about how the planting worked. Corn for the beans, beans to fix the soil, squash to protect them both. The 3 sisters feeding each other, giving and taking. But there was something else in the soil now, something that made it all too healthy, something that fed the plants beyond what they should have had. I left before dawn, left the firewood, left the tools, even left the cooler. Just grabbed my pack and went. Walked for miles before I saw another road. Flagged down a trucker who looked at me like I was crazy. I never reported it. What would I say? That someone planted an old garden method too well? That the corn was too tall? But I think about it a lot. About how the beans need the corn. About how the corn stands tall so the beans can grow. About how the squash keeps the ground shaded, keeps the weeds away, guards the others. And I think about what else might be under that soil. Feeding the plants, returning to the earth. Sometimes late at night, I think I can still smell it. That deep, rich, loamy smell of something growing fast and too well. A smell just a little too sweet. That's the thing about old farming methods. They work, especially if the soil's right. And out there, I think they found the perfect balance. I don't go camping anymore. Certainly, here's a long, highly detailed, and realistic first-person camping horror story inspired by the legend of the man in the corn. It's told without any supernatural elements or fantasy, just grounded, unsettling reality, in simple, everyday language, with a clear, meaningful ending. Bean Rose. I never used to believe in family stories. You know, the kind passed down from someone's grandpa or great-uncle, told over a fire or dinner table, always with a little too much detail or something just slightly off. Most of them just seemed like ways to keep kids from doing dumb stuff. Don't go to the river after dark. Don't walk through the old orchard. Don't stay out in the cornfield past sundown. It was all the same. Some weird story to make a place feel haunted or dangerous. I never took them seriously, but then I went out there. I had a cousin named Clay. He inherited the family land in central Illinois after his dad died, and he'd been slowly working the farm again. Just a few acres of corn and beans, mostly for his own use. He was a quiet guy, spent a lot of time alone. We weren't close, not growing up, but after his dad passed, we started talking more. I think he was just looking for someone to share stories with. Memories of the family, old stories, that kind of thing. One summer, he invited me to stay on the farm for a few days. Said I could pitch a tent out behind the barn, near the edge of the field, where the trees grew up against the property line. It was mid-August, hot, dry, and full of crickets. I took a week off work and drove out with my camping gear. I figured it'd be nice, quiet, just me, the woods, and maybe a few beers by the fire. I didn't know about the story back then. Didn't know about the beans or the hobo or what Clay's dad had told him. Not until the third night. The first 2 days were simple. I helped Clay with some small chores around the barn, clearing out old tools, fixing a section of fence. He had this way of moving slow but steady, never rushing, never wasting motion. We'd eat at his place, and I'd head down to my tent after sunset. It was peaceful. That third night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound that didn't belong. I'd fallen asleep with the tent flaps half open. The moon was bright, and the shadows from the corn stalks moved a little in the breeze, but the sound didn't come from the corn. It was a soft shuffle, not quite footsteps, more like someone dragging their feet through dry leaves and dirt. I sat up and listened. Came again. SHHH, SHHH, soft and slow, just beyond the clearing. right near where the cornfield began. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, but the batteries were nearly dead. Weak yellow light spilled out, not enough to see more than a few feet. Still, I stepped outside the tent and looked toward the rows of corn. Nothing moved. The sound had stopped. I stood there for a minute waiting, but nothing came. No bugs, no rustling, not even wind. Just heavy silence. The next morning, I checked the ground around my tent. No prints, no tracks, but I did notice something strange. Near the edge of the cornfield, maybe 10 feet from where I'd heard the sound, was a single small bean plant. It looked out of place. Just one little sprout, too green, too alone. This was a cornfield. The beans grew on the other side of the property, and this far out, no plant should have just appeared. It had no business there. I called out to Clay and pointed it out when he walked by later. He didn't say anything, just stared at it for a moment, then walked off without a word. That's when I started to feel like something wasn't right. Later that evening, he told me the story. We sat outside, watching the sun drop behind the tree line, and he leaned back in his chair and just started talking. He told me about the hobo, about the old man filling his shotgun shells with dry beans, about how the man screamed and ran off, never seen again, and then how the bean plants came up the next season, leading right to where the body was buried deep in the soft earth, sprouting from the holes where the beans had entered him. He said his dad always believed the guy had died out there, crawled off into the edge of the field, and sank into the soil. I didn't know what to say. The story sounded like something out of a weird folklore book. But Clay didn't laugh. He didn't try to sell it as a joke. He just told it and sat in silence. That night, I lay awake in my tent, staring up at the nylon ceiling. Every creak, every whisper of wind made me twitch. Around midnight, I heard that shuffling again. Same direction, same rhythm, like someone walking through the rows, not hurried, not careful, just dragging their feet through dry dirt. I held still. No flashlight this time. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. The sound went on for a while, maybe 3 minutes, slow and steady, until it faded off near the far end of the cornfield. I didn't sleep again that night. The next day, I went out early and walked the row where I thought the sound had gone. The ground was dry, cracked in places, but I saw a few things that made my stomach turn. Bean plants, just like before. Little green shoots, scattered along the row, not in any pattern except direction, leading away one by one like breadcrumbs. I followed them. Each one was maybe 10 or 15 feet apart, small but strong, too new to be leftovers from last season. These had come up in the last week, maybe days. I followed the trail to the very edge of the field, where the corn met a stand of trees and the earth turned muddy. That's where I saw the mound. Not big, just a hump of dirt, flattened over time. But the way the plants grew there was different. There were more of them clustered like a patch. And near the middle of it, something stuck out of the dirt, half buried, dark and cracked. I knelt down to look. It was a shoe sole, leather, torn and bloated from moisture, but unmistakable. I backed away and walked straight back to the barn. I didn't say anything to Clay. I didn't ask questions. I just told him I was leaving early. I packed up, drove home, and tried not to think about it. But that wasn't the end. A month later, I got a package in the mail from Clay. No note, just a small brown envelope with a Ziploc bag inside. In it were 3 beans, dry, hard, mottled brown with white flecks, the kind you'd cook in a pot. On the bag, written in black marker, were the words, "Last ones this year, came up near your tent." I didn't sleep that night either. And the more I thought about it, the more I started piecing things together. That hobo wasn't just some thief. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe he was sick, hungry. Maybe he thought no one would miss a few ears of corn. The old man, Clay's grandfather, didn't want to kill him. That's what makes the story even worse. He didn't load the gun with lead. He thought beans would hurt, scare him off, but not kill. But when he fired, and those beans tore through the man's body, it was already over. The guy must have run, bleeding, panicked, until he collapsed in the mud and never got up again. And the beans inside him, the ones lodged in wounds, in muscle, maybe even swallowed by accident, they sprouted. The soil took him and the plants kept growing. That's what haunts me. Not a ghost, not a curse. Just the idea that a man could disappear, become soil, and leave behind nothing but plants growing out of him. And somehow, some part of him never left that field. Even now, years later, I sometimes see bean plants growing in weird places. In cracks along sidewalks, behind dumpsters, in alleyways. Just one or two. But every time I see them, I freeze. My heart jumps. I think of that field, that sound in the night, that torn shoe in the dirt. I've never been back to Clay's farm. We talk sometimes, short texts, but I never bring it up. I think he knows. He's still out there, living quiet, watching those fields. And I still have the 3 beans in the Ziploc bag. I keep them in a drawer in my desk, far from sunlight, far from soil, because I know what they are, and I'm afraid of what might grow if they ever get the chance. I was never really into group trips, especially the kind where people bring guitars, sing around the fire, and drink themselves into a coma. I liked camping, but not like that. I liked silence, hard work, long hikes, and the satisfaction of building my own little home out there in the woods. I always preferred to go alone. No noise, no mess, no schedules, just me and the forest. Last summer, I planned a trip up north, somewhere along the border between Alberta and British Columbia. There's a stretch of forest up there that isn't exactly a park, but it's public land and big enough that you won't see another soul for days if you don't want to. I had a week off work, and after months of city noise, phones, emails, and bad sleep, I was ready to be alone. I packed everything I usually brought. A canvas tent I could set up in 10 minutes, a thick sleeping bag, enough food for 7 days, a camping stove, 2 knives, extra socks, first aid, and a small hunting rifle in case I ran into anything that wanted to fight for its territory. I double-checked every item and left early on a Saturday morning. I drove 6 hours until I was on gravel roads and then took logging trails until my tires could barely grip. After that, I parked the truck, locked everything up, and hiked another 2 hours through heavy forest. When I found the spot I'd marked on the map, I smiled. It was a shallow valley, nestled between 2 low ridges. A creek ran through it, clean, cold, and perfect for drinking once boiled. There was a good tree line for firewood, a small clearing for the tent, and enough flat space to stretch and breathe. I'd been there once before, 2 years ago. Nothing had changed. I set up my tent, laid out my gear, gathered some kindling, and boiled water for tea. The first day always went like that, just setting up, getting the body used to doing things slowly. No music, no books, just sounds, birds, wind, my footsteps. That night, I slept like a rock, warm and tired and full of instant soup. No thoughts, no dreams. The second day was uneventful too. I hiked to the top of one ridge just to see how far the forest went. Miles and miles of green and shadow. Not a sign of another human. That's how I liked it. I sat up there for 2 hours, eating jerky and letting my eyes wander. I felt calm in a way I never felt back in the city. It was the third day when things started to go wrong. I woke up to a weird sound. Not an animal, not a branch cracking. It was soft, like a plastic bag being squeezed gently. It was still dark out, but the fire had burned down to glowing ash. I sat up and listened. Nothing. Then, just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. That same soft, plasticky crinkle. This time it was closer, just outside the tent, maybe 3 feet from where my head was. I held still. My knife was under my rolled-up jacket, just within reach. I slowly grabbed it, listening hard. No footsteps, no breathing, just that slow, uneven sound, like someone adjusting something stiff and synthetic. Then silence again. Long silence. Minutes passed. Eventually, I unzipped the tent and looked out. Nothing. Just my gear, the trees, the stars. I stood up and walked a slow circle around my site, shining my flashlight through the trees. Still nothing. No prints. No animals. No trash. Everything looked just like I left it. The next day, I tried to forget about it. I figured it was probably something stupid. My tarp shifting, maybe a mouse rustling around. I went fishing downstream and caught 2 small trout. Cleaned them, cooked them, ate them. I let the day pass like that, peaceful and slow. But that night, just after I doused the fire and lay down, I heard the sound again. This time it was louder, plastic shifting, not crunching like a wrapper, but thick, like the casing of a cheap prosthetic. That's what it made me think of. Not a real one, the modern carbon fiber types with sensors, but the kind you'd get decades ago. Just stiff molded plastic with no function except filling space. And then I remembered something odd. On the drive up, I stopped at a gas station in a tiny town with a few boarded up buildings and a grocery store the size of a living room. While filling up, I saw a man walking along the road wearing a thick coat, even though it was warm out. He had something wrong with his arm. It hung stiff at his side and didn't move when he walked. It looked plastic, bulky, and awkward. He wasn't using it. It just swung a little as he moved. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just a local with an injury, maybe from work. But the memory of him came rushing back when I heard that sound outside the tent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up inside the tent with my back against the pole, listening. The sound didn't come back after that first stretch. No footsteps, no breathing, just that one brief, unsettling noise. The next morning, I found something new. Near the edge of the creek, about 10 meters from my tent, was a footprint. A boot, not mine, different tread. Deeper, like someone heavier had been standing there for a while. The ground was damp enough to hold the print, and I knew for a fact it hadn't been there yesterday. I checked the area. I found 2 more partial prints further into the trees, both going uphill, away from the creek and away from my camp. No other signs, no gear, no wrappers, no broken branches, just those prints. That was the day I decided not to hike out. Not yet. But something in me wanted to know what was going on. I've always been like that, curious even when it puts me in places I don't want to be. I made a tighter camp perimeter, kept my rifle closer, moved my food pack higher into a tree. That night, I built a fire that I didn't let die. I stayed up with a pot of coffee, watching the tree line. At around 1 a.m., I saw movement. Just a flash, white plastic reflecting firelight. Then gone. Behind the trees, about 30 yards off. No sound, no voice, just that brief shimmer of something artificial catching the flame and bouncing it back. I stood, took the rifle and walked slowly toward where I'd seen it. Every footstep was a guess. I didn't want to crunch a branch, didn't want to make a sound. I reached the spot and looked around. Nothing, not even a footprint. But I knew what I saw. When I turned to walk back to camp, my blood went cold. There was a piece of cloth hanging from a low branch. Gray, synthetic, looked like it had been torn off something, maybe a sleeve, and it was stiff, too stiff for regular fabric. I took it back to camp and studied it by the fire. There was a partial logo on the inner lining, some old manufacturer's tag from decades ago. I looked it up when I got back home later. It belonged to a small prosthetic company that had gone bankrupt in the early 90s. They used to make basic arm replacements for war vets and laborers, the kind without moving parts. That was the last night I stayed. The next morning, I packed everything up, fast and messy. I didn't even bother trying to organize. I just crammed it all into my bag and made for the ridge. I didn't stop, not for water, not for food. I made the full hike back to my truck in one push. I was shaking when I started the engine. As I drove back toward the logging road, I passed a small turnout, just wide enough for one car. There was a vehicle there I hadn't noticed before. An old blue sedan, rusted around the doors. No plates, all the windows fogged up. I slowed as I passed it. Inside, I saw piles of trash, wrappers, bottles, rags, and a plastic arm, sitting in the passenger seat. Just sitting there like it had been placed on display. I didn't stop. I didn't even look again. When I got home, I went down a rabbit hole. I searched everything I could about that area, about missing persons, abandoned vehicles, prosthetic parts, old injuries. I found a story buried in an online forum from 10 years ago. Some guy talking about a weird experience up near the border, where he heard mechanical rustling outside his tent at night. He said he saw a man from a distance, walking stiffly, one arm frozen like it was fake. But when he tried to follow, there was no one. He never went back. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he was doing in the woods, why he was walking through camps at night, or what happened to his arm. But I know he was real. I know he was watching me, and I know he didn't want me there. Now, when people talk about being alone in the woods, they think it means isolation, peace, freedom. But after what happened, I don't think you're ever really alone. Not out there. Not where there are no signs, no fences, no cell towers. I still camp sometimes, but only in campgrounds, places with rangers and rules. And I never, ever sleep without locking my truck, because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see, and I'll never forget the sound of that stiff, plastic arm shifting in the dark. I don't camp much anymore. I used to, though. Every other month, I'd load up my truck with the usual gear, tent, bag, stove, water jugs, the works, and head out alone. I liked the quiet. I liked the space. I liked not having to look at my phone or talk to anyone. It felt like hitting the reset button. I'd usually pick places that were off the beaten path. I had a couple state forest maps I marked up with pencil. Places where I'd seen deer, where the firewood was good, where the ground was soft and flat. My rule was always simple. Camp far enough that I don't hear traffic or voices, and no trails within sight. One spot I used to like was a dry creek bed about 10 miles past the tree line near Hollow Ridge State Forest. The official trail ends at a lookout, but I had mapped out a rough game trail about a mile beyond that. From there, you bushwhack down to a wide, shallow gulch. The trees thin out and it flattens into this hollow area where the creek used to run, maybe 30 years ago, before the water got pulled off upstream for agriculture. Now it's just dry pebbles and sand, with tough yellow grass and short, twisted trees. The nice thing was that it had a natural windbreak on 3 sides, and you could hear anyone coming a long way off. That place had always been quiet. No birds, not many bugs. Dead quiet, like Saond didn't want to travel there. I liked it. One Thursday morning in early fall, I decided to head back out there. The air was cool but dry, and I figured I had a few more weekends before it got too cold to sleep outside without heavier gear. I packed my truck, drove the usual route up through state roads, and finally onto a gravel fire access road that nobody maintained anymore. Took about 5 hours to get to the edge of the ridge. I parked, hiked my gear down through the brush, and made camp by late afternoon. That first night was perfect. I made a small fire with some old pine and watched the stars come out. I heard one distant coyote, maybe a mile off, but otherwise nothing. Just wind and the occasional creak of the trees. I ate a couple boiled eggs, drank some water, and read by headlamp until I got tired. The next morning, I made coffee and oatmeal and decided to hike further along the creek bed. I'd never gone much past the hollow itself. I figured if the creek had flowed further south, maybe I'd find another good spot to camp sometime. I brought a small day pack with water, jerky, a lighter, and my knife, and I headed out around 10 a.m. The dry creek curved and dipped between 2 hills, and the trees started closing in tighter the further I went. After about 2 hours of walking, I found something strange. It was a bunch of old rusted metal, tools mostly, buried half in the ground along the east bank. Looked like someone had dumped them there decades ago. A broken axe, part of a shovel, a rusted pot, even what looked like a crushed lantern. I poked around a little but didn't find much else. I walked another half mile or so before turning around. I wasn't carrying a GPS or anything, but I'd marked a few trees with red tape as I went, just in case. I followed my own marks back to camp and got there a little after 4 p.m. Everything looked normal. Tent still zipped. No signs of animals. Water bottles untouched. But something felt different. It's hard to explain. The air felt heavier. Still dry, but heavier. The trees weren't moving, even though I could feel wind on my face. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept waking up every hour or so. Once because I thought I heard a footstep. Another time because I swore something brushed the side of my tent. Could have been wind. Could have been a branch. I didn't hear any animals. No scurrying. No birds. Just that same heavy quiet. At one point, I unzipped the tent and just looked out. Moonlight was bright enough to see my campfire ring, the outline of my gear, and the dried creek 20 yards off. But nothing else. I waited a while, then went back inside. I don't think I slept more than 3 hours that night. The next morning, I found something that shook me more than I expected. Just outside my tent, maybe 5 feet from the flap, was a small pile of rocks. 5 of them stacked neatly. Each was about the size of a golf ball. Not unusual to find rocks like that around, but I hadn't stacked them. I didn't remember seeing them the night before. They were centered perfectly, like someone had taken the time to place them carefully. I stared at them for a while, then I kicked them apart. I told myself it was probably just some animal. Maybe a raccoon, maybe the wind, maybe they were already like that and I didn't notice. Still, I kept looking over my shoulder the rest of the day. I stayed close to camp that day, just gathered wood, cleaned my gear, and wrote a few things in my notebook. Around sunset, I took a walk 50 yards down the creek and tried to relax, just watching the shadows move on the hills. That's when I saw it. A boot print, in the sand, near the tree line. It was fresh. I could tell because there hadn't been wind or rain, and the edges were clean. It wasn't mine. I wear hiking boots with a thick tread, and this print had a flat sole, like a work boot, and it was big, bigger than my foot by a good 2 inches, pointed toward my camp. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes just staring at it. Then I followed it slowly, but I didn't find any others, just that one. I circled the area for 20 minutes, moving in wider loops, trying to pick up a trail. Nothing. No broken twigs, no scuff marks, just that one clean boot print near the edge of the dry creek. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up by the fire with my knife in hand and a headlamp strapped to my forehead, sweeping it back and forth every few minutes. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything, but I kept imagining things moving just beyond the trees. Shadows that didn't look right. My ears kept ringing, like they were trying to pick up a sound that wasn't there. By 4 a.m., I was so tired I could barely sit up. I dozed off sitting cross-legged with my back against a log. When the sun came up, I made a decision. I was packing up and leaving. I didn't know what was going on, but I didn't want to be there anymore. That's when I found the second pile of rocks. This one was inside the ring of stones I had made for my fire. Same kind of rocks, same number, 5, stacked perfectly. I didn't say anything, didn't even touch them. I broke camp in under 20 minutes and started hauling my gear up toward the ridge. I wasn't fast, but I didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't drink, just climbed. I made it back to my truck by early afternoon and drove without stopping until I hit pavement again. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe right until I was 3 towns away. I didn't go home right away either. I stayed in a motel for the night just to be around people. I didn't talk to anyone about it for months. It sounded crazy in my own head. Nobody would believe me. No threats. No obvious signs of someone being there. Just a feeling. Pile of rocks. A boot print. But I know someone else was out there, watching, close enough to leave things behind without being seen. A few weeks later, I went back to my maps and started checking that area again. I did some digging online too. Found an old report buried in a local news archive from 2003 about a missing hunter who went out near Dry Creek and never came back. They found his truck. They found his gear in a ravine, but not him. No signs of struggle. No body. Just gone. The weirdest part? In the police photo they used in the article, he was wearing big brown work boots. I don't camp much anymore. I still go outside, still hike sometimes, but I stick to places with trail signs and other people nearby. I don't sleep in the woods alone now, not since Dry Creek, and I never ignore a pile of rocks. Not anymore.